Welcome to the March edition of Signal Conversation, a very special conversation we're going to have today. The focus of our March issue is the future of work. And you cannot discuss the future of work without also discussing the impact of the past year on how we work. And joining us today, we have two extraordinary leaders. One, Debbie Majoras, the Chief Legal Officer from Procter & Gamble, and the second, Arianna Huffington, the founder and CEO of Thrive Global. Both have very personal stories about how they've adapted their work styles, both during the pandemic and even before it. And I'm looking forward to getting into this with both of them. So welcome, Debbie and Arianna.
Thank you, John.
Thank you, John. Good to see you again, and great to be with Arianna as always.
It's very good to see you. So you guys have a personal connection, and I know over the issues that we're going to discuss, but I want to start first with you, Debbie. You have recently given a very powerful talk about your experiences of stress during the pandemic. And as a leader, I know that's hard to do. You said it's important to build personal resilience, and that many of us are struggling with fear and tragedy, isolation and depression. How do we balance these aspects of our lives and keep our, as you put it, resilience muscles from going flabby?
Yeah, you know, John, I think when COVID led to a pretty widespread lockdown last spring for so many people here and in the rest of the world, most of us really went into kind of a crisis mode, and we're all pretty good at crisis. And so it was, you know, hey, we can all be under the same roof and do all of our work the same way and homeschool the kids and take care of elderly parents and cook for everyone and keep a crowded house clean and you know, watch Netflix and do puzzles. But this thing has gone on. And so people's resilience muscles are wearing very thin, I think, and people's balance feels very, very out of whack. So in kind of thinking this through, you just can't stay in crisis mode forever. So I think first, it takes thinking about this and acknowledging it, and then also taking some actions. So the first thing I think is important and that I have really worked on is eliminate the thoughts of perfectionism and guilt in this. I mean, how on earth are you going to be perfect in the best of circumstances? But in this, which none of us has ever gone through before and no one else has, give yourself some grace and give others grace that, hey, we're all doing the best we can.
Absolutely. And Arianna, you have been a multiple guest at Signal in the past, face to face. And I recall you telling a very powerful story on stage about your own lack of boundaries. And this was before the pandemic, when you got so burned out by how hard you were working that you collapsed at your desk, if I recall correctly. And that led you on the journey to starting Thrive. And I'm curious, you know, how, given all the pressures that Debbie just mentioned, you know, how do you create more of those boundaries? Do you have additional steps that you might speak to? And how do we identify if we are close to or at burnout? And you know, what do we do after we identify that?
So, John, first of all, I can't tell you how important it is to have the chief legal officer of a big multinational company speak like that. That's kind of game changing, and it shows the shift the culture is going through. And as you and Debbie know, we were facing these problems even before the pandemic. We were all living these frenetic, breathless lives, assuming that the way to get everything done is to power through exhaustion and burnout. That was the cultural assumption. So if there is a silver lining during this incredible time of pain and losses for millions of people, it is that we are pausing, this forced pause, and rethinking the way we work and live, both pre-pandemic and post-pandemic. Debbie wrote a piece on Thrive Global, how prioritizing my well-being boosted my success as a leader of a multinational company. That's the mindset shift that has to happen. The recognition that far from there being a trade-off between our own well-being, recharging, creating boundaries, and our performance as a leader. Our performance is enhanced when we take care of ourselves. And that, John, is more important than ever right now, when being a leader is not doing maintenance. It's having to be creative, innovative, empathetic. These are all qualities that are the first to go when we are running on empty. And that's why this is more important than ever. And leaders have to model this behavior in order for them to be adopted across the organization. So we are at this truly amazing moment where this culture shift is happening, partly also because all these issues, which used to be issues normally just handled by the HR departments, have now landed on the CEO desk. Because if your employees are suffering from mental health problems or deep anxiety, depression, it's going to affect their productivity. So even if you didn't care for them, you care for the business outcomes. And that's why this is this transformational moment.
I'm curious, the steps that both of you acknowledged before the pandemic in terms of wellness and self-care that obviously have been quite productive, Debbie, in your case. How have they been modified during the pandemic, and how has that changed as the work from home, especially for office workers, has become almost a year-long habit?
There are things that we all crave and need that we don't even know, and part of that really is the human connection piece, and that's also had to be modified during these COVID lockdowns. And so, sometimes I think you can find yourself in kind of a dumpy mood and whatever, and you're not even sure why. But the fact of the matter is, what I know some of the research you all have done, Arianna, shows is what happens in the brain just in that very quick time that you meet up with someone in the coffee room, for example, at your office. And so trying to actually recreate, some of that human connection, it takes some work and some doing. But I have found that what I do now is I keep a little list of old friends I haven't talked to in a while. When I think of them, I write it down. And then when I have 5 minutes in my day, I sit down and write an email to one of them. And that's kind of nice for me. It's a nice little break. But then when I hear back from them, it's a terrific break, right? It's just
like a serotonin hit, huh?
It's just a great connection. So those are some of the things that I've tried to change and modify.
So John, what I have found both personally and in our work with many companies, including P&G, is breaking down everything we want to do into these micro steps. The idea of starting a new healthy routine may seem overwhelming, but if we break it down into what we call micro steps too small to fail, then it's doable. And as Debbie alluded, this is a judgment-free zone, no perfectionism. It's like starting wherever we are. So my personal micro steps, and out of all our hundreds of micro steps that Thrive, my actually favorite ones, have to do, first of all, with a topic that is very dear to your heart, John, and you've been a pioneer talking about it, which is our relationship with technology.
Mm-hmm.
This has become all the more important during COVID because we are totally dependent on technology.
Yeah.
But it's also so critical to disconnect from it. So my number one micro step that I'm kind of religious about it is picking a time at the end of the day. It varies when I declare the end of my working day. Because the truth is there is no end to our working day. We have to arbitrarily declare it. And I mark that end by turning off my phone, my iPads, everything, and charging them outside my bedroom. Now, that may seem very overwhelming for people. 72% of people sleep with their phones, either on their nightstand or cuddled up with them. So we say start with one day, start somewhere, it doesn't matter. And you see the difference in the quality of your sleep if your phone is not there on your nightstand. So if you wake up in the middle of the night, you are very likely to be tempted to go, and the minute you start checking emails and texts, you're back in your worldly life.
Right.
It's hard to recharge. And just one more micro step, because it's particularly relevant to P&G. In our work with P&G, we know that P&G kind of owns the world's habits, washing the dishes, brushing your teeth. And this is a great opportunity for what in behavior change science is known as habit stacking.
Habit stacking.
You're washing your hands. This is a great time to remember 3 things you're grateful for. And if you do that multiple times a day, or brushing your teeth, or any activity, or washing your hair that doesn't require your brain, use it to reinforce gratitude. Because gratitude is a huge antidote to anxiety. And it really changes the brain pathways. Our brain is much more plastic than we thought. So let's use these opportunities to change channels, really.
Yeah.
And another thing I know from my own team at my work has come up a lot, and it's a question that's very difficult for leaders to answer, but therefore I'm going to put it to you both, which is, what does the world look like after this? How does work change? We've all learned, if we're working in offices and we're used to going to offices, we've all learned how not to go to offices. It doesn't mean we're good at it, and we're still learning. It just means that we're used to it. How do you both imagine things will change when we get to the other side of this pandemic, presuming that we do, because there seems to be light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, I'll start. And, John, talking about P&G, we of course have a team working on it, but I'll give you a few of my views on it. Look, the best I've been able to tell, that the work day was really set by farming, and the workplace and the going to the office and doing everything there was largely set by men who candidly had spouses at home, and so work and home could be fairly separate. And our society has changed drastically since then, since those times. And yet the workplace has changed some, but not a whole ton. So I think there's some work to do. I think we've been doing it. I mean, for example, on my team, before we went into this COVID, I think 80% of the people on my team had some sort of flexible work schedule. So it isn't that we weren't getting it at all. But I think this is in so many ways right there in front of us now for changes we need to make. And so I think it's really critically important as we think about this to ask, what purpose is served by the office setting and having people in it? What do we need to do there, and what do we not have to do there? And I think we can have that discussion better now, frankly, because previously there were still a lot of skeptics about working from home, right? There were a lot of people who thought, those people are lazy, they're not really working, do I have to check up on them? What's really going on? But now we've really put the focus on it. In fact, last spring, I kept saying, we're living in the revenge of the introvert, right? because our introvert colleagues, by the way, I'm one of them, it was like, oh my gosh, I'm not going to the office every day where there's all these people around me sucking the life out of me. You could see the differences in the extroverts and introverts in the team and how they were handling it. So I think this is actually another part of how we can think about inclusion. And so I think this is the key. There are magical moments to getting teams together, right? It's the very definition of a team. Teams need to, first of all, build relationships and trust. And that's much easier to do in person. I mean, the technology is keeping us alive, but it's not the whole game, and it can't be, in my opinion. So we have to think about, how do we still preserve those times when teams will be able to get together, and how do we build office space even that is most conducive to that kind of team relationship building. And then the real magic, which is when people are together, differing viewpoints coming at each other, different levels of creativity, and finding third and better ways to solve the problems that we're all trying to solve and produce in really productive ways for society. So to me, there's going to be a hybrid here, but the key will be, I don't think you can say everybody just gets to come and go as they please, because then you would lose that team element, and we have to find a way to preserve it.
Yeah, makes sense. Arianna, what do you think is going to change in the workplace after all of this?
Well, I'm actually very optimistic. I feel that the pandemic will be a portal that allows us to imagine and build a new and better world of work. Because let's face it, the world we left behind was not working. We were dealing with skyrocketing rates of diseases, diabetes, hypertension, 75% of which are connected to the way we live and work and can be impacted by changing that. We were dealing with a mental health crisis. The World Health Organization had acknowledged burnout as an occupational hazard. This is the world we left behind.
Right.
So let's not glamorize it. And we now have an opportunity to change that. And in the process, as Debbie said, we are discovering that diversity and inclusion ultimately depends on bringing the best out in people. And if people are burnt out, they operate on survival. They operate from fight or flight. And that's not the place from which you can care for your teams or be more inclusive or actually care for the planet. So one of the things that I'm personally very passionate about is making that connection between planetary sustainability and personal sustainability. Our saying at Thrive is burnt out people will keep burning up the planet. So all the things we want to achieve, environmentally, in terms of diversity and inclusion, start with the individual and how connected we are with what is deeper and more resilient in ourselves.
That's
and
great.
I must say one more thing, which is leaders are going to matter more than ever.
Well, these are great thoughts, and I love the idea of the pandemic as a portal, and I love the fact that you're connecting it to sustainability, which, by the way, is our April focus for the next edition of Signal. So thank you for providing a bridge to that. And thank you, Debbie and Arianna, both for joining us in this Signal conversation. I have a feeling it's going to be one of our very special ones, and I hope we can see each other in person in the coming months.
Thank you so much, John. Thanks for all you are doing.
Yes. Thank you, John. And thank you, Arianna. A pleasure.